Hello and welcome. Today we will talk about ethical leadership, chapter 11 of the textbook. Let us continue talking about ethical leadership, and now more specifically we'll talk about managing ethical conflicts. Ethical business conflicts do occur when there are two or more positions on an ethical decision. So it is likely to happen, and conflict is a reality of life. Sooner or later, you're going to face situations where your views and somebody else's views are very different, and you'll have to decide how to resolve that ethical dilemma or conflict. One benefit of ethical conflict is that it helps pinpoint some of the ethical issues that we face in society. Ethical conflict issues will not be brought to management's attention without effective mechanisms for transparent communication. So if you want your employees to bring ethical issues to your attention or to manager's attention, you need to be transparent with them. In other words, have an open door policy and treat everyone with respect and dignity, and do not discount what they tell you. Investigate what they tell you and let them know what the final decision was, so they appreciate that and they know that what they tell you actually gets counted. Employees themselves should be trained to handle conflict situations whenever they can. Training employees to recognize and resolve conflict can prevent employees from being the victims of questionable conduct, such as bullying or workplace mobbing that seems to happen quite often, especially when new employees come in and they're very different from everybody else, or they have higher performance and productivity, or based on some unique characteristic that makes them more different compared to the group that already exists in a department. Whenever faced with a conflict, which obviously everybody is going to face conflict sooner or later, employees can choose to approach the conflict issue in one of 5 different ways. So they can ignore the issue, they can confront the other person, they can report the conflict to the managers, they can use a hotline or a telephone to basically let the managers know, or whoever is on the other end of the telephone or hotline, or they can engage in external whistleblowing. What are some different styles of conflict management? Well, conflict management is categorized into also 5 styles: competing, avoiding, accommodating, collaborating, and compromising, as was initially mentioned by the Thomas Kilmann model that seems to be in literature, journal articles, and in textbooks every single year. So the model is sustained, it's over time, and it's reliable and valid. These styles deal with 2 dimensions: assertiveness and cooperativeness. Assertiveness is acting in your own best interest. In other words, win, lose. On the other hand, cooperativeness means working toward the best interest of the other person. In other words, win, lose. So those are the 2 different dimensions of these styles. Competing conflict management styles are going to be there among you and your colleagues. The conflict management styles presented in your textbook, again, the 2 dimensions of cooperativeness and assertiveness. So you can be either low or high in each dimension, and you can see that when you are using a compromising style of conflict management, you're not getting what you want and the other party is not getting what they want. So you basically settle for whatever is available to you and to the other party, meaning you leave unhappy and they leave unhappy. So compromising, which is probably what happens in most practical conflict management situations, is not a good alternative. You need to reach for collaborating style of conflict management where it creates win-win relationship between you and the other party. So again, try to understand, see what is your dominant style of conflict management, and try to understand others' styles of conflict management so you can be prepared when it comes to dealing with resolving a conflict with other individuals. But the goal is to aim for a collaborating style of conflict management. If your natural style of conflict management is to compete because you are an athlete and you're conditioned to think that way, you need to make some adjustments for the workplace, because competitive styles of conflict management does not apply into the workplace. Remember, we're working through interdependent relationships with our employees, with our colleagues, with other departments, with suppliers, vendors, and even other organizations. So we need to have a collaboration style of leadership in conflict management so we can win and they can win as well. The goal is to have sustainable relationships for everybody's overall in long-term benefits. So let us look at these 5 styles of conflict management. So the first one is competing style of management. Leaders with a competing style of conflict management tend to be highly assertive. Win for me. And they're not always cooperative. As a matter of fact, when you look at the athletic competitions that are one-on-one, let's say boxing, for example, you're trying to win. So those individuals are conditioned with the competing style of conflict management. Competing leaders believe in always winning at any cost, and they measure success by how much the other side actually loses. Keep in mind that when you're making the other party in business environment a loser, it doesn't always work, at least not for maintaining good relationships in the interdependence that we all have in our workplaces. The competing style of leaders are usually not considered ethical because their conflict styles makes them somewhat abusive at times and less likely to consider the concerns of others or other stakeholders. That doesn't mean that competing style of conflict management does not work. It just means you have to be a lot more sensitive to make sure you don't create losers in the organization, because it's not athletic competition. The avoiding style of conflict management basically means that leaders with this approach are not always effective because they avoid conflict at any cost, even if it leads to misconduct in more conflicts. So they are usually uncooperative and somewhat non-assertive until it becomes a necessity and they can no longer avoid it. Then we have the accommodating style of conflict management. So leaders who adopt this accommodating style are highly cooperative, but they seem to be also non-assertive. People with this approach to conflict usually give in to the other side, even if it means sacrificing their own interests and values. So think about how hard do you work in your teams. Do you ignore your own personal assignments in order to do the team assignment first? Well, if you do that, you're basically falling in the accommodating style of conflict management because you're ignoring your own in order to please the team. But you should be focusing on maybe doing the teamwork and your own individual assignments as well. Because sacrificing the company's principles and values to accommodate the other individuals can be a serious breach of an ethical leader's responsibility. Then you have the compromising style of conflict management. So leaders who adopt this compromising style of conflict management are in between assertiveness in cooperativeness dimensions. So on this continuum, they're basically somewhere in between. They believe that the best approach to resolving conflict is for each side to give something up in order to gain something of value for their side. And finally, we have the collaborating style of conflict management. Leaders who adopt a collaborating style of conflict management tend to be both cooperative as well as assertive. So rather than immediately compromising, collaborative leaders collaborate with others to find a creative and alternative way that is beneficial solution to all of them. In other words, it's win-win for me and win-win for you. So this way both parties can be fully satisfied. Because if one of us is not satisfied, that relationship is not going to be sustainable. At least you're not going to negotiate or work with me in the future when you have an opportunity to leave. So these collaborative leaders seek win-win solutions that best meets the needs of all stakeholders. Effective leaders can use different styles depending on the given situation, circumstances, and people involved. Ethical leaders should have the ability to identify the conflict management styles of others that they are working with. These ethical leaders must know which style of conflict management can apply to a particular issue and with the people involved. Keep in mind that the ethical leader engages in ethical decision making to determine when to be assertive in a given situation, when to compromise, and when to basically accommodate or even to avoid. So sometimes you may have to avoid a conflict temporarily until you have more information or more resources to effectively deal with the people involved. Good luck managing all conflicts and being an ethical conflict manager. You can do it. And since groupthink is not a good thing for the workplace, you need to do whatever you can to avoid it in both small and large groups in your departments. First, you need to understand groupthink and how it can occur in your department. Second, allow open and honest discussions and encourage critiques, questioning, and criticism to avoid groupthink. Third, criticism should be welcomed and not minimized or dismissed. Fourth, create group tension by assigning a devil's advocate or having half of your team or group members on the pro side and the other half being on the con side to adequately evaluate decisions. So if you have to take the role of a devil's advocate, you can always say, okay, well, so that's one alternative. Let me take a devil's advocate role here and basically reflect on the possibility that your suggestion does not work. What happens after that? What is the next plan? What is the contingency plan? What is the side effects of the fact that if your plan does not work, what would we do then? So again, that's a devil's advocate. In other words, you're trying to think about other possibilities here. Fifth, on important matters, bring in the appropriate subject matter experts, either internally or externally, to help your team, your group, make effective decisions and to avoid conflict in groupthink. Six, document the situation, options, recommendations, and implementation timetable, needed support, as well as the budget. Seven, have another team review your output to see what kind of conclusion that they would make for your team. And then you can assess, evaluate things from a very different perspective because they were not part of your group. So avoid groupthink as much as you can and try to diversify your teammates so everybody can think differently, see things from a different perspective in order to have effective win-win solutions for all relevant issues. As always, remember that ethical behavior is a skill. You need to police, you need to evaluate, and you need to improve your ethical muscles regularly so you can be the best ethical leader who can manage and lead and guide others effectively in any given situation. Good luck.